Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of Ask a Human. I'm Trish McAllister, the State Bar's Law Practice Management Program attorney. And in each short Ask a Human episode, we answer AI questions submitted by Texas lawyers in plain English with practical steps you can use today and clear guardrails so you stay ethical and effective. Remember to submit your questions to the Ask a Human page or just directly to me at trish.mcallister@texasbar.com. We've got Cassie Burns with us today to answer your questions. Cassie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Cassie Burns. I am a counsel at King & Spalding in our Dallas office, and I have been practicing e-discovery for most of my career, which means I've worked very closely with technology and data in litigation and investigations. And that is what has prompted my interest in AI and brings me here today.
Very witty. Okay, well, thanks, Cassie, for joining us. Cassie is always so great at doing these videos, so we're grateful that she's with us again. And to make these videos more efficient, Cassie's going to answer questions you submitted that are sort of similar in nature. So I'm going to be asking a series of questions, not just one at a time, so that Cassie can answer them all at once. So our first set of questions is about resources and best practices, essentially. So what training resources do you recommend to learn the best way to draft your parameters for questions submitted to AI so that the outcomes of the prompts are focused and, less prone to inaccuracies? And then what are the best practices using AI in a law practice?
So these are all excellent questions. There are many resources out there. And I suspect this may be why the question is asked, because you want to know what are the best resources out there. And first of all, if you're watching this video, this is a resource. So, very glad that you joined us. There are other Ask a Human videos out there. So we encourage you to check those out and watch them if you haven't already, along with any other AI-focused CLEs the State Bar of Texas may have out, or AI-focused toolkits available through the State Bar of Texas. Now, other ways you can learn about how to best prompt, I think that beyond those legal resources I just mentioned through the State Bar of Texas, or perhaps your local bar association, we're starting to see some other legal-focused groups create some sort of training materials. For example, I know Vanderbilt Law School, they have an AI lab program called Veils, and they're actively working right now on building out training materials. So, that might be something we share with you all, the broader membership of State Bar of Texas, as that becomes available. And something we'll be doing is keeping an eye out on those legal specific resources. And if it's something you all are interested in, we can try and curate and provide links to some of those resources as they become available. Of course, the challenging thing is that this is a quickly moving world we're dealing with. So a resource that's not available today may be available tomorrow, or one from a year ago may feel a little bit out of date. That being said, stepping back, you can also go to platform documentation and see what resources they have available. So speaking more generally, Gemini or OpenAI or Claude, if you're using any of those, they more than likely, or they absolutely do, have prompting tools available. So I think it was last week or the week before, I saw that Gemini provided or published a Prompting 101 document that was very practical and user-friendly, where it explained how you might iterate on a prompt. So you start with one thing to then build over time. And what I found particularly helpful about it is it broke down the types of ways you might prompt based off of the role you would have in your organization. Now, keep in mind, this is not a legal organization focus. It's more of a corporate focus, but it broke things down into administrative assistants, not legal assistants, but administrative assistants or administrators versus HR or CEOs or sales. And that to me was very helpful from a structural perspective of how it recommended engaging with the tool and prompting. So I know that Claude and again, OpenAI have those tools available. Look out for them. And if you or your firm has engaged with a legal specific tool, ideally that those service providers, those software developers are sharing resources for you, whether it's a onboard training or whether it's documentation or white papers. So be sure to keep an eye out, for all of that. And I think it goes without saying, as you're learning how to prompt, it's also important to always remember your obligations to validate the results and also making sure you're using the tool appropriately in consideration of confidentiality and privilege. And we talked about those items in a bit more detail in prior sessions.
The next series of questions are, what does AI do well at this point for a law practice? And then how has AI been successfully and ethically used in a law practice?
I think that, if we think about these technologies, there are things that we acknowledge they do well, and then start thinking about how that fits into legal practice. So, there are some things that AI does well. It's good at pattern recognition. And I know from my e-discovery experience, processing large volumes of data. So if you have any familiarity with discovery, especially broader discovery, you probably know that we've been using AI and machine learning in a certain degree for many, many years. So it's a very robust practice. Now we're just layering additional generative AI elements onto those workflows we already have. And there's even case law that talks about sometimes the computer is more accurate than a large group of attorneys. So, I think we have to realize that sometimes a machine is better at doing something than a human, but also knowing that the human, the attorney, still has to oversee that process. So AI is also good at summarizing things. If you have a complaint that you've received and you just want to understand it quickly, quick snapshot understanding. If there's a new law that's passed and you want to understand that, it can be a good tool to quickly get up to speed and can potentially extract information. Now, I think the thing you need to be mindful of is if you're using it for summarization, knowing at what point I'm using it and I'm leveraging that summary for something that has a heightened level of accuracy requirements. That's something to be mindful of. So, and we talked about this in the last Ask a Human episode of, what are some validation steps you might have in mind, but just be mindful as you're using these things, knowing the context in which you're using it, the risk associated with making sure everything is 100% accurate. It may vary depending on what you're doing. So I just, be mindful of how you're using it, when you're using it, and with what. Now, we also know that legal research is in play when we're talking about AI. So tools out there that are established are already starting to integrate additional AI-enabled research tools. I think it goes without saying, you have to be very careful if you're using general purpose tools for legal research, because we know that there is an issue with AI hallucinations where the LLM will create a citation and a quotation around that or precedence around that, even if it doesn't find something, because a general purpose tool is not going to have the same guardrails or limitations to try and mitigate the risk of those hallucinations. And we've seen, unfortunately, quite a bit of case law or orders from judges sanctioning attorneys for not validating the results. So legal research, if you're using it, you absolutely, no ifs, ands, or buts, you have to validate. You have to validate and make sure the case actually existed. And you have to validate and make sure the context is correct. Is it describing the facts or procedure, or ruling around that case accurately? And are you using it correctly? So, that goes without saying. That does have a slightly elevated area of risk that if there's an error there and it's a filing, it's a higher likelihood it's going to get caught and you're going to get called out for it. We think about legal in the context of writing briefs, and it could be useful there, but maybe it's writing a letter, or maybe it's changing the tone of a letter, or, I think that just from a drafting perspective, it's very useful. Now, what's the ethical use? we can look to guidelines by the State Bar of Texas, and they do a good job of talking about obligations for confidentiality and transparency with your client and accuracy and oversight. So, a lot of these legal focused AI tools, they're building them so some of these safeguards are in place. So there may be it may address the confidentiality and privilege issues because it's protecting and in cordoning off your prompt so there's no risk of it, rolling up into a public LLM model and being trained. I think something to be mindful of, don't forget that you need to be mindful of your own clients' confidentiality and privilege. But if you're receiving another party's productions and litigation, you have to be mindful of the obligations you have with that received data as well. So, the main things, and you can find this information on the State Bar of Texas, website where they talked about this, is just being aware of confidentiality, protecting privileged communication and work product, transparency with the client, so what obligation do you have to tell the client you're using those tools, and then the oversight. And then also make sure you keep an eye on local orders and rules to see if there are additional certification requirements by a district court or that local court or that judge.
Excellent. Thanks, Cassie. Let's jump back up to crafting prompts, because in a way that your answers made me think, is there a way that you can mitigate some of those concerns by crafting a really good prompt? So what are some of the best practices for prompting?
I think that, and we talked about this in the last one, you set up the context of like the role of the LLM, your defense counsel, your plaintiff's counsel, your court appointed neutral, and then you're telling them the task and you're telling them the output that you're wanting. And sometimes you also have supporting materials that you can include. So here's an example of the format of the output I want, in addition to specifically naming, listing out the output that you want that tool to have, the format of it. You could also do things like, I've included reference material. So maybe you've collected all the case law that you wanted. You've downloaded copies of it. So you've done that preemptive diligence of, I know the cases that I want. I just want this tool to help me draft, since I've curated all this case law. And so maybe your prompt would include things like, do not make up, do not only use case law included in this prompt. Do not make up facts if they do not exist. Do not be, overly, agreeable with me and what this ask is if it's, a ridiculous argument. So you can really tell it like, do this, don't do that type of instructions. Think of it as, you're onboarding a new associate or a law clerk that knows nothing about proper drafting style or norms, and you're telling it exactly what you do and do not want it to do. So those are other ways you can supplement your prompt. And I would say, as you go, maybe keep a log of or track of these prompts or that type of language, that guardrail language, so you're not having to recreate the wheel every time.
Yeah, that's a really good thing, because I do think that people think that they need to recreate these prompts every single time or think of all the guardrails every single time.
Something I've done is I've prompted something and I've gotten an output, and then I took it and I edited it all. I didn't try to iterate and get to a better version via prompting, but then once I edited it to the state that I wanted, I uploaded that. I included that revised draft in my prompt and said, please see how I revised the above prompt. How would you recommend I revise my original prompt in the future to get it closer to this draft? So you can use the tool to help improve your prompt style. You could even talk and say, I don't want you do not draft any content from this initial prompt. I'm giving you background information. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. How would you suggest I draft a robust and refined prompt based off of my concerns? So there's even that element of using the tool, so you don't have to come to the table with that. Make your life a little bit easier.
That's so great, honestly, because I do think some people are just nervous about it. And
Mhm.
once they start engaging, they'll realize it's organic and you can improve pretty quickly if you just ask AI what it would do.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and I usually try coming to the table knowing like this is what I'm wanting. This is
yeah,
my hypothesis for what I think it will be, or I know this is the format I want. This is all of the supporting information. So you're coming at it prepared, especially if you're really in draft mode. If you're just
yeah,
kind of brainstorming, that's different. But the more prepared you come, the better results you're likely to have more effectively.
right. That makes sense for everything in life, honestly.
This is true. This is true.
Okay, well, let's jump to our third set of questions, which are really all about, different AI tools for lawyers. So, are there specific AIs for lawyers? Which ones are better or more reliable today? What AI platform is the one best suited for attorneys? Which AI software are litigators using and how? Are they drafting, researching, editing, all of the above? The good and bad of using AI. Which AI platforms do you find most useful, Cassie? And how will that help me as a sole practitioner?
There are a lot of questions here, and it's hard to answer all of them because
Yeah,
the challenge is that everyone has a unique perspective and need that they have, from a solo practitioner to mid-size to big law. So I'm in a big law firm, and we have technology that is available to us after vetting by our security team. So luckily, the whole process of going through and deciding, doing that security assessment, making sure that process was in place. I didn't have to worry about that. I just knew my security department was going to take care of that. And it also highlights when you're working in a firm environment like that, why you need to use the firm approved tools. Now, a solo practitioner or small law firm, they may not have that available. So, I don't want to answer one thing and knowing that, hey, maybe that's not appropriate from a cost perspective or other for a small practitioner. So this is what I would say. I think at the very least, knowing that discovery tools are actively working on integrating generative AI into their existing ecosystem. That's out there. So be mindful, be aware of that. If you're looking and dealing with larger discovery, legal research tools out there. Those established software providers that we know of, Lexis or Westlaw. None of these people are sponsors. Like we're just telling you that. They are integrating AI into those systems. Maybe it's document management systems, I manage, like they're all starting to integrate these tools, those already established legal software companies. I wouldn't be surprised if most of them are doing it to optimize their existing offerings. So LexisNexis and Westlaw, they're going to be focused on AI and the use of research. So Relativity, they're going to be focused on AI and the use of discovery. Now, what we're starting to see is, I think, a mix of others beyond the, traditional legal tech companies. So you're seeing some that are a general purpose legal tool, I would maybe say, or that's what they're aiming for. So that might be Harvey AI or others. That's something to look into, but there are also others that are very niche and specific for a specific purpose. Maybe it's focus on depot prep or in depot witness, analysis. Maybe it's focused on, another, very specific area of contract drafting or family law or mediation. So I could never list them all in one session. I will tell you a really great resource. Legal Tech Hub is, a group that they're keeping an eye out on all these legal tech companies. And that's one I would check out, and something we've talked about in the Legal Practice Management Committee for the State Bar of Texas is that something that you all want to have a little bit more visibility into, or you might want to see some resources, in addition to the training resources available on, the State Bar of Texas website. And, that's something we'll consider. The hard part is everyone has very distinct and unique uses for it. And that's what makes this a little hard. So, no easy answer for that. I mean, for me personally, the tools that I use the most are going to be, honestly, probably Copilot and Harvey just to help
Yeah.
with drafting. But, again, I come to the table very organized, and some of my drafting is maybe business development or, internal process documentation.
How are litigators using AI?
I think they're helping draft. They're helping draft documents to a certain degree. I think depot prep. I think especially when you talk about like distilling and transforming the fact element of fact and law into, a more broader case strategy level, because we have so many facts, because we have so much data, at least in the world I live in. And so how can you use AI to create efficiencies there? So maybe it's creating timeline chronologies much more efficiently. You could have the tool draft a one word summary, or, 1 or 2 sentence summary of something, or give you key information around key people, or, even me as someone who has wide scale review that I'm doing, perhaps preparing for a larger review, I might upload the complaint and maybe client documents or internal memos I have and have it extract acronyms or jargon so we can have a better understanding of the idiosyncrasies around our clients' communication style. So I think any of those uses are very compelling, and maybe even case management, data management, as far as trying to have an understanding of depot transcripts after the fact. So I think that those areas are very, very ripe for leveraging AI where possible. Of course, keeping in mind, making sure you're a tool that has the proper confidentiality and privilege pieces in place. And especially in litigation, if you're dealing with, not only do you have a duty of transparency to your client, but you may have obligations via the ESI protocol or protective order in how you may be able to use that data. So there may be some level of prohibition of certain tools, or at the very least disclosure. So something to be mindful of.
Definitely, definitely. So our next set of questions is really about, unintended AI use. So not as long a series of questions this time. Is AI a part of our practice, even if we don't intend it to be? So, if, for example, when we do online research, including research using just a search tool like Google or something, do the materials that we see include AI?
Absolutely. We're starting to see, and this question is a really great one. It's an acknowledgement that AI is getting integrated and embedded in tools we've already been using. So I talked previously about Westlaw and Lexis. We're seeing that in general consumer tools. So our software browser, we're getting AI summaries now when we do a web search. I still generally I like seeing the results because I want to go in and see them myself. And there have been times I feel like this is the State Bar of Texas. You all are going to appreciate this. I remember I was at the State Bar of Texas meeting in this past year in San Antonio, and asking, I didn't think that there was an Admirals Club at the San Antonio airport, but I just did a Google search to make sure. And the AI summary said that there was an Admirals Lounge or Admirals Club in the San Antonio airport. And I was like, I don't think that's right. So the AI summary hallucinated and said that there was an Admirals Club lounge. So I think it just reminds us of how easy it is to maybe over rely on things. Sometimes having that summary is kind of nice, but I still want to drill in and see the links it provided and go in there. Our email definitely has it in there. It's starting to, auto type for you, or offer to auto type. Spell check is a type of, AI. So, and, the auto population whenever you're starting to type a question and it's going ahead. I think that anytime you're using it and it's providing a summary, whether you're in Word and you're getting a summary of the document, or Adobe has some AI, functionality baked in, always validate, especially when it's really important, So I think that that's really important. And this is where the challenge or something to be careful of when you're starting to see some of these court orders maybe requiring the use of AI. Sometimes what they're asking you to do is so broad that realistically, like we're all using AI in so much. So I
Yeah.
think we're going to start seeing like a better understanding of how that should be defined if we are requiring an additional certification requirement in there, because like AI is integrating in our everyday lives. So
It is so true. It really is so true. And I like you kind of relied on something that came up in a Google search or whatnot, some search. Um, and I thought, oh yeah, that's great. And then later I was like, wait a minute, I don't think that's right. I've never heard that before. So I redid it and did a deeper dive. And of course it was wrong. So that was
mhm.
kind of my first experience with actually almost relying on information that was absolutely inaccurate. And that was not that long ago, only a month ago. So I think it is getting much better. And of course, you're not prompting in those situations. So you
Yeah,
also
you're
have to
just
be just kind of careful. Okay, so let's move on. And it kind of segues right into this question, these series of questions, which are, more specific. And I'll just give you two, which are, can I get AI to rename and organize my prior Word documents? And can AI summarize transcripts with a search for particular words or phrases? So, kind of that discovery tool.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the first one. I thought this was great because it's asking a really practical question that there is a real pain point. It's tedious, it's horrible, and having to rename things. So, like a great example of that is, maybe you're prepping a witness binder and you want to add tab 1, tab 2, to the front of every single Word document, or every single maybe document you've downloaded, right? Um, I I have not found a tool that does that for me. I wish I did. Like there may be, if you have data management tools, there may be some functionality, but I think like this is a great question to me because it highlights a real practical pain point that that person is feeling. I am feeling myself. I have felt myself. I know many other, people have. And that's not something that some of these AI developers are focusing on fixing. But a lot of times it's these very like tedious practical things, not drafting a brief. So I don't know, maybe this question will inspire someone to develop a tool that will make everyone's life easier. So there may be a way to engineer some sort of multi-step process. I am not aware of one that did that. And if you know of a tool that does that, definitely let me know. I'd love to know. The other, and so I think it's just mindful to remember that not every AI is not going to make our lives easier in every single context. So that was mainly why I wanted us to go through that question. Now, the other one, can AI summarize transcripts with search or particular words or phrases? I mean, absolutely. And the concept of the idea of searching with keywords or phrases, that's been around for a while. As long as you have native text available in the document, so you're working with a PDF that's searchable or some other file type that's searchable, you can search right now with text. What makes AI, generative AI, useful, is in two ways. One, you're talking about summarization, but I want to talk about searching a little bit more because the thing that AI does beyond just an exact word or phrase search, it also does semantic searching. So, if I'm talking about Turkey Day, it will know I'm talking about Thanksgiving. So, or if I say, I want to know every conversation about, Thanksgiving, custody disputes or something like that. And maybe there was a deposition testimony where they were like, every Turkey Day, they have to have the kid, even though I should have it every other year. Like that's where the AI comes into play, is that it has that context, that conceptual context to avoid the scenario of not having the perfect exact keywords. So it maximizes your ability to search. The other item alluded to in the question is you can use AI to summarize the transcript. So, again, you're going to want to double check those summaries, and maybe that's in your prompts. Like, please summarize, focusing on these issues that I'm most interested in. Please include page and line citations for everything you summarize, just to make your life easier. So your prompt includes information in the output that will make your validation easier at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, again, with a caveat, make sure you're using an AI tool with the proper confidentiality and privilege controls in place when you're using those tools out there.
Awesome. Yeah, it is true. I mean, I do think just making sure that it gives you the location of where, so you can confirm easier, just does make your life a lot easier. Well, thank you so much, Cassie. This has been great information. I know people are going to just love, having these answers. And I know we've covered a lot of ground today. So do you kind of want to do a little bit of a summary of some of the key takeaways from your what you gave us today?
Yeah, I think B, test out the prompting and seeing what tools are there. I think some of the general purpose tools have some really great guidelines on prompting that I think are pretty generic, are applicable across at least general purpose platforms, and play with it and test it. And that's something that we've said consistently across here. The more you use these tools, the more proficient you'll get in getting the answer, the output that you want more effectively. Testing out those AI tools, I think anything regarding drafting or summarization, of course, document or data review and legal research, of course, making sure that the legal research is accurate is key. And knowing, of course, that you're always going to be validating, especially if there's a higher risk or more at stake there, heightened level of validation. And knowing that we're getting a mix of legal tools out there. We're really at the ramp up, I think, of starting to see some tools where we're having some general purpose legal tech tools. And then, the emergence of very specific use case tools, some that their target audience may be large law firms, and some are really focused on smaller practices as well. So knowing that there are resources like Legal Tech Hub out there, and we'll see what else is out there that may aggregate some of this information for you. And knowing that a real true pain point may not actually be addressed by any AI right now. Unfortunately, that is the case. But in some ways, a transcript summary is another example of that can take a long time. And if you can do it with fairly decent accuracy and then just have someone validate it, that's a great cost saving you could pass on, to the client. So, and time saving for you as well, because we're all busy people. So, I think the main thing is watch this space, watch State Bar of Texas resources, law practice management resources, the tools that are evolving as they go, resources that become available. And, the good thing is you're watching this, you're engaged, and continue to be engaged because we're all learning this together.
Yes, we definitely are. And I have not checked out that Legal Tech Hub, so I'm going to check that out, and be a little bit more engaged than I have been trying to stay on top of things, because it is definitely changing. And it is great, honestly, that they're, now at the point of being able to segment into, niche markets like family law or whatever. So that's great. It's going to be so exciting to see what comes. But thank you so much, Cassie, for joining us. And thank everybody who's watching this for joining us for episode 3 of Ask a Human. We definitely hope you found it informative and practical. If you have any feedback for us, again, you can always feel free to shoot me an email at trish.mcallister@texasbar.com. We will continue to address your questions in these episodes. So looking forward to producing the next one next month. And we will see you then. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.